Avatar The Last Airbender has one of my favorite power systems in existence. It has depth and complexity, but that also means it can be a bit confusing. With so many subcategories of bending and so many exceptions to pre-existing rules, it can be hard to keep all the information in order. So that's exactly what this video aims to fix as we explain all 5 types of bending in Avatar The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. For the sake of simplicity, we are just going to use those 2 main series as our points of reference, since those are the pieces of media 99% of fans are familiar with, and I also haven't read all the extra material yet, but I'm working on it. Let's start with waterbending. Waterbending is the first of the 4 elements we're introduced to, and it's debatably the most versatile of them. It centers on fluidity, both of movement and the flow of battle, as waterbenders are extraordinary at adapting to the ever-changing circumstances of combat. We see this in almost every single fight, as waterbenders will use water or ice for defense before using the same water offensively too. This brings us to our first subcategory of bending. Every kind of bending has some applications that rely on their central element but act differently and require a different skill set. This subcategory is controlling the temperature of water, as adept waterbenders are able to change water into ice or steam, and they can also manipulate the water while it's in those states. Waterbending has a number of other subcategories as well, but before we get into them, I want to cover some applications of water in its traditional forms. Here are some of the most notable waterbending techniques we see. The octopus form, which allows the user to control 8 water tendrils with themselves at the center. This technique is great for offense as well as defense, and it can be easily converted into other techniques as well. Ice breathing, where the user turns the vapor from their breath into ice to freeze an opponent or object. The water ring, which gives the user a ring of water to use as they like. Water arm tentacles, where the user coats their arms in water, which can then be used to entrap opponents' limbs and also just act as a solid source of water for the user. And finally, and probably the most iconic of the water-based techniques, the water tornado, where the user creates a vortex of water below them to propel themselves out of water or take a central vantage point above enemies. There are a ton of cool waterbending techniques shown throughout the series, but because of the free-form nature of bending, many of them are only seen once or twice. So let me know what some of your favorites are in the comments down below. For now, we're going to move on to our next subcategory of waterbending, plant bending. Plant bending basically allows the user to control the water that exists in plants. We see 2 different styles of this technique, one of which is the foggy swamp style used by the swamp people. Foggy swamp style is a specific style of water bending similar to northern or southern style, and while it does focus on bending water itself, some users are able to use this technique to create giant vine monsters using plant bending. This technique is pretty powerful and versatile, giving the user a lot of safety from outside attacks as well as strong short-ranged attacks from the monster's arms, and also long-ranged attacks too. However, it does require a lot of time to gather the plant material required to use it, and it also seems fairly susceptible to cutting attacks and high-powered explosives. The other form of plant bending we see comes from Hama during the Puppet Master episode, where she extracts the water from within plant life, killing it in the process, and then manipulates it. But plant bending isn't the bending subcategory Hama is most famous for. Her most important and most deplorable contribution to waterbending is, of course, bloodbending. Bloodbending allows a waterbender to control the water within the body of another person or animal, taking away their autonomy and allowing the user to puppet their body. This is an insanely strong technique, but it does have 2 caveats to its usage. First, it can only be used during a full moon when a waterbender's power is at its highest. And second, bloodbending can be resisted by another waterbender if they are a more proficient bender than the bloodbender. Or at least these are the limitations that existed in The Last Airbender. In Legend of Korra, things get a bit crazy thanks to Yakone and his children. These 3 are bloodbenders with special properties. The exact reason for these properties is not known to us, but they seem to be genetic since the trait was passed from Yakone to his children. All 3 of them are able to bloodbend at any time of day and during any time of the month, meaning they aren't restricted to only bloodbending during the full moon. This already makes them strong benders, but Yakone and Noatak, later known as Amon, take this even further, as they have the ability to bloodbend using only their minds, allowing them to take complete control of other bodies even if their hands or bodies are bound. Yakone used this to attempt to escape Republic City after he was convicted of bloodbending, and Amon used this ability to control opponents on a micro scale to make sure he was never hit by an opposing attack. But Amon's most iconic usage of bloodbending was using it to take bending away from other benders. We never get an official explanation for how this works works in either of the main shows, but in the art book for season 1 of Korra, it's said to be done using bloodbending to permanently block a bender's chi paths, preventing them from bending. But this can be undone by the Avatar, so it's not as big of a deal as it seems. Another subcategory of waterbending introduced in the Legend of Korra is spirit bending, where waterbenders encircle an angry spirit with water and then use spirit magic to calm it. While this ability is primarily used to calm spirits, it appears that it can also be used to corrupt or destroy the spirit as well, as we see Unalaq do just this to both Korra and Jinora unsuccessfully. The water tribe in general has a close connection to the spirits, with both the moon and ocean spirits residing in the spiritual oasis within the northern water tribe. This location also has a great amount of spiritual energy, which is probably because of the spirits living there. The last subcategory of waterbending is healing. Healing is an ability that only some waterbenders are able to use. I don't think we know exactly what gives someone the ability to heal, but it seems to be quite random. As far as I can tell, waterbending healing can be used to heal both external and internal wounds, and it can also be used to evaluate the body, as we saw Katara use it to see that an earthbender's chi was blocked. It seems like an overall useful ability, but its limitations aren't very clear, nor are the exact methods behind how it works either. Like, it was able to heal the burns on Katara's hands in a matter of seconds, but it didn't seem like it helped too much when it was used on their father during the invasion, so who knows exactly what it does. Much like all the other forms of bending, waterbending was originally gifted by the lion turtles, and techniques for waterbending were then developed by watching the moon push and pull the tides. This means waterbending is the only one of the 4 elements to learn from a being that is not an animal, and this close connection to the moon also means waterbenders are more powerful at night, with their power of course peaking during a full moon. There are a couple of other minor subcategories such as mudbending and bending without arms, but these are either pretty self-explanatory or not explained at all. So we're going to move on to the next element, Earth. Earth is another very versatile element, and it's the one with the second highest number of subcategories. Earthbending centers on being sturdy and solid. Almost all of its traditional applications rely on having a solid grounded stance, and in many cases earthbenders cannot bend earth without being more sturdy than rock itself. The techniques for earthbending were derived from badger moles, who use earthbending to see and dig around. Competent earthbenders are also masters of neutral jing, which basically means they're patient and are willing to wait for the best opportunity to strike for the maximal advantage. And when they strike hard, as earth is one of the most brutal and destructive elements there is. I mean, it's fighting with rocks. What else would you expect? Much like waterbending, there are a ton of techniques within earthbending that we could cover, so I just want to talk about the most common and iconic ones. Undoubtedly, the most common earthbending move by far is just making rocks levitate. This is done by pretty much every earthbender in the series, and it's the basis for a number of other techniques, like this machine gun attack Aang performed, which might be my favorite earthbending move in the series. Another really common application is using earth as an elevator, moving the earth below one's feet in order to move vertically or diagonally. Earth is also often used as a shield to block strong attacks or redirect other rocks. One of the most important earthbending techniques in the series, and also one of the least common, is seismic sense, which allows the user to sense the movement of others as well as the shapes of rooms around them based on the vibrations they feel in their feet. This technique is of course primarily used by Toph, but we also see it used by Aang and Toph's daughters in the Legend of Korra. Seismic sense likely also has an extension for those that are most adept with it, as there are earthbenders who are able to tell when someone is lying based on their heartbeat and other bodily changes that happen when they lie. This is another technique that is mostly used by Toph, which is why I believe it is derived from her seismic sense. But Nose Ring Earring Guy in the Legend of Korra also used it, before he got yeeted into the Shadow Realm for all eternity. Another common technique in the original series is earth armor, where the user creates a suit of armor out of earth or other earth-based materials. But this technique seems to have completely died out by the time of Legend of Korra, likely because of the invention of metal bending. Metal bending, as the name implies, allows the user to bend metal by manipulating the refined rocks within the solid. This sub-bending category was invented and primarily used, once again, by Toph. Man, she's really just the GOAT, isn't she? Prior to the invention invention of this bending style, metal was a common tool to restrain and inhibit earthbenders, but after it became one of their most powerful tools. In Avatar The Last Airbender, metal bending was a bit primitive as Toph was still perfecting the technique, and as such, its uses were pretty limited. She mainly used it to essentially squeeze metal to change the shape of it, like we saw with this door, the deck of this ship, and this giant airship fin. She also used it to become the subject of a horror film, or at least that's probably how it felt to these firebenders. In The Legend of Korra though, metal bending is a lot more advanced and a lot more fleshed out. We see it used to control strips of metal that act as handcuffs and to manipulate wire, allowing for unique forms of movement and restraining of opponents. They can also manipulate metal in the form of sheets, as we saw when metal bending was used to restrain protesters in Book 1 and during the Metal Clan showdown in Book 3. The most notable use of metal bending in The Legend of Korra though, at least in my opinion, is the manipulation of mercury, a liquid metal that is poisonous to humans. This was of course used on Korra in an attempt to kill her, but the applications of this are pretty fascinating as well. If metal like mercury is manipulatable, does that mean metals like lead, tungsten, or uranium are as well? If so, that would be kind of crazy. The only issue with this possibility is the existence of platinum, which is a metal that is so refined it cannot be controlled by metal benders. So if those aforementioned metals are as refined as platinum or more so, they won't be manipulatable. But metal bending isn't the only important subcategory of earth bending, because there's also lava bending, which allows the user to turn earth into lava and then control said lava. This is an aspect we don't see a ton of, as we've really only seen 2 people use it in depth, but it seems to be extremely powerful regardless. The lava created by lava benders seems to melt the earth it comes in contact with, adding to the amount of ammo the user has and removing earth from other earth benders at the same time. For the most part, this ability seems to be somewhat free-form, with no specific techniques being used besides Gazan's shuriken, which was pretty cool. Another pretty prevalent subcategory is sand bending, which allows the user to bend sand. Once again, surprising, I know. Sand bending seems to be very closely related to regular earth bending, unlike lava and metal bending, as we saw Toph do it with zero issue while the gang were stuck in the desert. Its capabilities seem to be overall pretty limited in scope though, with it mostly being used to shoot piles of sand and power these sand sailors. But we did also see Toph create an entire sand Ba Sing Se, which means it can be controlled with extremely high precision. Earthbenders also seem to be able to bend mud in a way similar to waterbenders, as we see Katara and Toph team up to keep the wall sludge in the drill during Book 2 of the original series, and we also see Toph do some mud bending in Book 4 of Korra as well. Next is fire, which despite getting so much screen time in the first series, is one of the more undeveloped bending types in the show. That's not to say it has nothing going for it, but compared to earth and water, there's quite a bit less that it can do, but I think that's by design. See, in the case of water and earth, benders of those elements must procure the element from a pre-existing source in order to bend it. They cannot produce it themselves. Even a waterbender pulling water out of thin air isn't making the water they're bending. Although I guess technically one using their own sweat is, but that's more of an exception. Firebenders and airbenders, as we'll talk about soon, do create their own elements from their body. This inherently makes firebending a bit easier to use, as you can theoretically use it anywhere except the coldest of areas. As an element, fire is probably the easiest to understand. You do martial arts moves and fire comes out of your hands and feet. The strength of this fire is determined by the bender's motivation and emotional state, with strong emotions like determination or rage creating more powerful fire than weaker emotions. Fire also revolves around the breath, which all bending relies on to an extent, but it's really emphasized to be important to fire. Due to the truly freeform nature of fire bending, there aren't really any common techniques besides basic punches and kicks, so instead I'll cover some of the most iconic firebending attacks we see. One of my favorites is Zuko's fire whips that he uses in Ba Sing Se, giving him huge range to attack with. Another is his breath of fire and fire breathing in general, as it seems to be a pretty powerful technique overall. One technique I should talk about is flight or propulsion. Under normal circumstances, firebenders are able to use fire to propel themselves short distances without assistance. During Sozin's comet though, strong firebenders such as Ozai are basically given the power of flight. This is of course thanks to the enormous power the comet gives to firebenders. Firebenders also gain strength Earth during the day, similar to waterbenders at night, and also lose their bending during a solar eclipse, similar to waterbenders during a lunar eclipse. Even though fire is a fairly straightforward element, it still does have two subcategories. The first being lightning. Lightning is created by firebenders when they separate the positive and negative energies in their body. Once they allow these energies to become one again, lightning is created, and the firebender's body acts as a conduit for it, allowing them to choose where it goes. This technique is extremely deadly, both to those that it is used on and potentially the user themselves. Because of lightning's dependency on separating positive and negative energies, the user must be at peace both mentally and physically for this technique to be executed successfully. If they're not, it will literally blow up in their face as they're unable to correctly separate the energies in their body. Luckily, there is a counter to lightning in the form of redirection. When someone is struck by lightning, they can take it into their body via one arm and shoot it back out the other. This is a powerful technique, but when using lightning redirection, it's super important to make sure the lightning is taken into the stomach and does not pass through the heart, or it could kill the user. The other subcategory of firebending is one of the most insane abilities in the show, combustion bending. This ability is wild. It essentially allows the user to create explosions with their mind. These explosions have a ton of power and are strong enough to easily destroy Earth and are hot enough to easily evaporate water. There's really no element that can counter these explosions, as they also have enough energy to overpower airbending, and firebending is pretty poor for defense, so it cannot stop the explosions either. This makes it one of the most powerful forms of bending in the show, but it does have one weakness: the eye on the user's forehead. If the user gets hit in this spot, they will be unable to launch explosions. Instead, attempts to create explosions will literally blow up in their face. On top of this, the explosions always originate from the same point on their body, meaning some well-timed metal bending can turn the user's head into soup. Combustion bending also seems to be an ability that you are born with and not one that you can learn, similar to lava bending. So it is also an ability that is very rare to come across. I mean, we only saw 2 combustion benders over all 7 seasons of the 2 main series. That's really rare. The only other application we see for fire is when it was used to evaluate Korra's body for spiritual damage, but it was only used in this one scene and we never really get an explanation for how it works, so we don't really know much about it. Firebending was originally learned from the dragons, which were later almost hunted to extinction. You know, part of me finds it hard to believe that the people of the Avatar universe could nearly wipe out such a mystical and marvelous animal, and same goes for the lion turtles, which were also hunted to near extinction. But then I see what real-life humans did to the buffalo, and tigers, and elephants, and rhinos, and lions, and turtles, and you know what? Let's just move to airbending. Airbending is a lot like firebending in a lot of ways. It's an element that doesn't require an outside source, and the techniques used are pretty free-form. But there is one large difference. Whereas fire is mostly focused on offense and aggression in combat, air is based on evasion, and it is the only element centered on that skill. This makes a lot of sense considering the pacifistic nature of the air nomads, as they avoid conflict and killing except when absolutely necessary. And it's probably a good thing that they're pacifists, because airbending can be extremely powerful and surprisingly deadly. Like firebending, airbending doesn't have a ton of techniques that are frequently used aside from gusts of wind. The thing about wind in this case is it can be an extremely versatile tool. It can be used for offense if you want to blow your opponent away, defense if you want to redirect an attack, evasion if you need to dodge and move quickly, and self-preservation, as they can also be used to break the fall of the user or some targets. One technique I do want to highlight though is the airball. This is a technique that allows airbenders to create a ball of wind, and it is surprisingly versatile. It's the basis of the air scooter technique Aang invented and then used throughout the series. And it's also the technique that allowed Zahir to kill the Earth Queen. So that should show how versatile it is. Aang and Zahir are both airbenders that display abilities that no other airbenders are seen using. In Zahir's case, that is of course flight, a legendary airbending ability that has only been unlocked by one other airbender in history. It requires the user to essentially achieve enlightenment by letting go of all their earthly tethers. In Zahir's case, his tether was Pli, so after her death, he unlocked the ability. Flight is just about as broken as it sounds, but it's not all powerful, as the flyer is still susceptible to other kinds of bending. Chains also of course work to limit flight if you can capture the flyer. Aang, on the other hand, showcases many unique abilities. The most interesting ability Aang has that no other airbenders seem to share is his superhuman agility. This dude is fast, and it allows him to make very effective use of an airbender's evasion. evasion, having no issue evading attacks from multiple opponents at once. Aang was also an expert at using the glider, a tool used by airbenders to emulate flight, but it could also be used as a conduit for airbending in combat. Airbenders learned airbending from the Sky Bison, and those are the 4 core elements of the Avatar universe. But there is still one more kind of bending that falls outside of the elements, or rather encompasses them all: energy bending. Energy bending is a bit of a weird one. There are no native energy benders, meaning no one starts out as an energy bender, but avatars can become energy benders with the guidance of others. As the name implies, energy bending allows the user to bend the energy that exists within the world, and there are a few applications of it that we see throughout the show. The first is using it to look through the roots in the swamp, which has been described as using their energy to see another location touched by the roots. The most notable use for energy bending, though, is to give and take away bending from people. In the age before the Avatar, the lion turtles did just that, giving and taking away the 4 elements from humanity in order to protect the species. Once Avatar 1 became Avatar 1 and closed the spirit portals, the lion turtles decided they no longer needed to protect humanity, and so they stopped giving out the art of bending to new people and letting them live on their back. This power to give and take away bending was then given to Aang by one of these lion turtles, allowing him to take bending away from other people, such as Fire Lord Ozai and Yakone. In order to successfully take bending away from another person using this method, the attempter's spirit must be unbreakable, or they will be destroyed. What exactly that means, we don't know. Aang also gained the ability to restore bending to those who got it taken away, which we see him do to Korra, who then learns the ability herself. Korra later demonstrates another application of energy bending, which is the most literal definition we have seen, bending the energy produced by spirit vines to protect herself and Kuvira, and she also used energy bending to free these people from their spirit juice slop pods as well. Interestingly, energy bending does have an animal guide like all the other elements, and that is of course the lion turtles. And I think that's everything. Let me know if I missed anything in the comments down below, and also let me know what your favorite type of bending is. Thank you so much for watching as always. I really hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you next week for another video.